Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Nehemiah chapter 2, Casting a Vision for Change. In Nehemiah chapter 1, we looked at Nehemiah. He's talking to God about the king. Here in chapter 2, we're going to see him talking to the king, and then we're going to see what happens as a result of that talk. Chapter 2, verse 1, and it came about in the month Nisan, and now this is after a month has passed since he was talking to God, but now we're at the first of the year, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it to the king. We closed the last chapter with the observation that Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king, and that was a very important position. First of all, it would put you in the presence of the king, because anytime he would drink something, you would take it first, and you would actually drink from the cup to make sure it wasn't poison. So he took up the wine and gave it to the king. And now I had not been sad in his presence, so the king said to me, "Why is your face sad?" And notice that word "sad." I had not been sad. Actually, the Hebrew word ra is just the normal word for bad or even evil. I think that it's probably this idea, because he's been mourning. He doesn't look so good. He doesn't look so happy. And when the person who's testing your food doesn't look so happy, that's not a good thing. Why is your face sad? Why is your face bad, though you were not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. Ro'ah lev. It's sadness of heart, badness of heart. And like I said, when your food taster doesn't look so good, then it doesn't look. What's happening? Is there a plot here? Is there a problem? And we read that Nehemiah, he wasn't just afraid. He wasn't just very afraid. He wasn't just much afraid, but he was very much afraid. And that actually captures the Hebrew there. Verse 3, and I said to the king, "Let the king live forever." In other words, no, I'm not trying to assassinate the king. Let the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs is desolate and its gates have been consumed by fire? Now notice how he describes the place. We know the place he's talking about. He's talking about Jerusalem, but he doesn't call it that. The king said to me, "What would you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. I find this fascinating because Nehemiah is going to be a book of prayer, and we're going to read a number of Nehemiah's prayers. And we're not going to read the prayer here. It just says, "I prayed to the God of heaven," and then he's going to continue talking to the king. And it reminds me, sometimes we pray these rather long and ornate prayers to God, and I think that's good, well and good. And then sometimes we pray a very short prayer, "Lord, help!" even if it's not done audibly. And that's, I think, what takes place here. And I said to the king, "If it please the king, and if your servant has found favor before you, to send me to Judah, and again he calls it, to the city of my father's tombs." And it's interesting that again, and we know that what city he's talking about. I think even the king knew what city he was talking about, but he doesn't call that city by name. He calls it the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. I think there's a reason. I think there's a reason why he has avoided the name of the city. We go back to Ezra chapter 4 and verse 7. In the days of Artaxerxes, Bishlam, Mithredath, Taba'el, and the rest of his colleagues wrote to Artaxerxes. These are people that are sort of against the Jews. And they're writing to Artaxerxes, king of Persia, and the text of the letter was written in Aramaic and translated from Aramaic. So it was written in the sort of the common language. This language, it's not the language of the Persians. It's the language that everybody in the Middle East spoke, even though there's a Persian language that was for the royal courts, but those who were outside of Persia might not know Persian, so they were writing this in Aramaic, which is close to Hebrew. And this is the copy of the letter which they sent to him, to King Artaxerxes, "Your servants, the men in the region beyond the river, And now let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come to us at Jerusalem. This is in the days of Zerubbabel, even before the days before Ezra has made his return. The days of Zerubbabel back when the temple was first being rebuilt. But notice they've come to us at Jerusalem, and they are rebuilding the rebellious and evil city, and are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now, what they were doing is they were rebuilding the temple, but they're being accused of rebuilding the walls and repairing the foundations. And you think, well, what's wrong with that? After all, to have a temple, you'd want to have a city in which the temple would be there. Verse 13, now let it be known to the king that if that city is rebuilt and the walls are finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, and it will damage the revenue of the kings. In other words, they're writing saying, O king of Persia, it's in your best interest to stop this rebuilding project, because if they complete the rebuilding project, then they're going to stop paying taxes to you, king of Persia. Verse 14, now because we are in the service of the palace, and it is not fitting for us to see the king's dishonor, therefore we have sent and informed the king, so that a search may be made in the record books of your fathers, and you will discover in the record books and learn that this city, the city of Jerusalem that they've already named, is a rebellious city and damaging to kings and provinces, and that they've incited revolt within it in the past days. Therefore that city was laid waste, and what they're saying was true. Jerusalem had in the past been a rebellious city, not against the Persians, against the Babylonians, but still it had been a rebellious city. And so the letter concludes that we inform the king that if that city is rebuilt and the walls finished, as a result, you will have no possession in the province beyond the river. So you better halt it. And the work had been halted for a time. The work, not just of rebuilding the walls, but the work of even rebuilding the temple had been halted as a result of this letter. So now we flash forward to Nehemiah's day. And Nehemiah has made known, without naming the city, although the king knows what city he's talking about, the king said to me, and notice the queen sitting beside him. I think that's fascinating, that the queen is sitting beside him. It makes me wonder, who is this queen? After all, the story of Esther had taken place at a previous date, maybe 20 years earlier. Is she still there? I don't know. I'm not sure of the makeup of the kings, because they're not named here by the Greek names. They're named here Ahasuerus and Artaxerxes and things like that. But the king said to me, with the queen sitting beside him, how long will your journey be? And when will you return? And Nehemiah doesn't say, well, I'll have to get back to you on that. Notice, so it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite time. He's actually planned it out, how long this is going to take. And he gives a time when this would take place. Verse 7, and I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may allow me to pass through it until I come to Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, because after all, not only is it the king's empire, but everything in that empire, including forests and deserts and everything else, belongs to the king. And so he's asking permission to be able to go into the forest and get some lumber, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress, which is by the temple, for the walls of the city, and for the house to which I will go. Well, here's the good news, verse 8. And the king granted them to me, and the king granted them to me because the good hand of my God was on me. Now this reminds me of the book of Proverbs, where we read Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. That is, yes, there are kings and governors and presidents, and they make decisions, but it is God who is the ultimate decision maker. And so you pray for your king, you pray for your president, you pray for your governor, that God would lead his heart into wise decisions, either through the wisdom of that king or president or governor, or even in spite of it, because the king's heart is like channels of water, and he can turn that heart wherever he wishes. Verse 9, Then I came to the governors of the provinces beyond the river, and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. So he's got a full entourage who was going with him on this pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official, these are Persian officials, they're not necessarily Persians. For example, Tobiah, we're told he's an Ammonite, but they are people that are back in the area around Jerusalem. They're not in Jerusalem, but they're in some of the surrounding areas, and they have the authority of Persia behind them. And they hear about it. Notice it was very displeasing to them that someone had come to seek the welfare of the sons of Israel, because they didn't particularly care for the sons of Israel. And that's going to come up in our story, that they're going to be the opposition. Verse 11, So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. I have a friend, Dr. Warren Gage, and he's remarked that whenever you see 3 days, look for maybe a picture of Jesus. And so he's 3 days, and then we read verse 12, and I arose in the night. It reminds me of somebody else who, after 3 days, arose to bring about new life. And Nehemiah arises in the night, and what he's going to do will be preparatory for bringing new life into the city. And so I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I did not tell anyone what my God was putting into my mind to do for Jerusalem. And there was no animal with me except the animal on which I was riding. So he goes by night to make a circuit of the city to plan out this process of reconstruction. And of course, you can't begin reconstructing the city until you've made a diagnosis and a survey of what the problem is. And so he goes out around the city. You can actually go around portions of the city today and still see broken walls, not going back to Nehemiah's day, but much later. This is the walls that were destroyed as a result of the Roman destruction of Jerusalem many, many hundreds of years later after Nehemiah. Verse 13, So I went out at night by the valley gate in the direction of the Dragon's Well. And he goes out. The Dragon's Well was a reference to this place where there's a natural pool of water. There's a natural spring, the Gihon Spring, and there's a legend behind that spring because the water tends to move. Sometimes it gets higher and sometimes it gets lower. It's almost like it's breathing sometimes. And there's an old legend that there's a dragon at the sort of the base and the foundation of the whole world, and that's his breathing coming out from this pool. And so the name had sort of stuck. And Nehemiah goes out through the area. He doesn't go down into the pool because it's dark, and just let me tell you, it's dark down in that pool. But he says, Then I passed on to the fountain gate and the king's pool. So there's two pools. Actually, they're connected. I'll take you there in a second. But there was no place for my mount to pass. So I went up at night by the ravine and inspected the wall. Then I entered the valley gate again and returned. As I said, you can go or you can follow that circuit today. And you can see how steep it is. Although, to be honest with you, my pictures do not do justice to quite how steep that landscape is as you go around the circuit of that area, which in time past was known as David's city. Here's a picture of Paula as she's actually going into that pool. That spring, the Gihon Spring, and you can go there if you go past that area. There's a channel, a corridor, a tunnel that has been dug, connecting this spring with a pool at the southern end of David's city. It's about 1,800 feet long, And as you can see, we're actually standing in water because that water channels the pool. When you get to the end of that pool, just before you come out, there's an inscription there. What you're seeing is now a reproduction of that inscription, because the original inscription was discovered in the 1800s. It was transported to Istanbul, where it's in the museum at Istanbul, and it tells the story of, in Hebrew, this is very old Hebrew, but it's Hebrew, of how this tunnel was dug in the days of Hezekiah. And you come out to the other end. You come out to the other end, and you have old Hezekiah's tunnel, and this is the south end. Well, Nehemiah doesn't go through this tunnel because, like I said, it's dark, and it's dark in the tunnel, but it's even dark to get in and out. So what he's done, he's made a circuit of the entire area. Now notice there's an area in dotted line in the green. Not that area, but around the city of David. A very narrow area. Let's look at another picture. Here's a picture of what this would have looked like leading up to Nehemiah's day, and this is what Nehemiah is going to rebuild. This city of David. It's not all that large. It's actually fairly small, and there's Solomon's temple right at the northern part, and maybe on the southern part of that might have been Solomon's palace. We're not exactly sure where his palace was, although we've discovered an area that's not pictured so much on this picture because it's so relatively new, that is about halfway up, and some major foundation stones, some large stones that are thought to maybe be the Palace of Solomon. Verse 16, and the officials did not know where I had gone, or what I had done, nor had I yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the rest who did the work. So Nehemiah makes a survey. And it's him and God. There's a few people that are accompanying him. He makes a survey, and he does so in secret as he plans out the work. Verse 17, then I said to them, now he calls the people, you see the bad situation we're in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. Verse 18, and I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words, which he had spoken to me. In other words, he brings us up to date. Everything that we've read, he now tells them. Middle of verse 18, then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. He's talked to God, and now he feels that he's made the plans, and now he shares that conversation with them, and he shares his plans with them, and they prepare now to do the good work. So, chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 10, Nehemiah talks first to God and the king, and as we saw, Nehemiah walks around the walls by night, and now he talks again, this time to the people, but also to the opposition, and we're going to see them come forward as well. So verse 19, but when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official, these are the folks that are they're not Persians, but they're officials working for the Persians. And also now we're also told, and Gershom the Arab, he's going to be sort of their go-to person. And they hear this, they mocked us and despised us and said, what is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? They're sort of charging Nehemiah that same sort of charge that had been in that previous letter, a charge of rebellion. Verse 20, so I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven will give us success. Now I could have just flashed, these are the king's orders, but that's not what he does here. The God of heaven will give us success, because Nehemiah, even though he's got authority from the king, he's also got authority from a higher source. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build, but you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem. This isn't your thing. This is God's thing. Now, his words to them remind me a little bit of something I read in the New Testament about another individual that comes forth from Samaria, like these people were probably based in Samaria, that comes forth from Samaria, and it's the story of the two Simons, where Simon Peter had gone to Samaria, and there was another Simon who was trying to, for his own purposes, was trying to pay some money and buy some of the Holy Spirit. And Peter said to him, "You have no part or portion in this matter, for your heart is not right before God." And yet it's in a context where there were other Samaritans that were being allowed to come and be a part of the church. Why? Because their heart was right before God. You see, even though you might not be Jewish, and I'm not, sometimes I wish I was, I think that'd be cool, but even though I'm not Jewish, I can come to the Jewish God because I have a Jewish Messiah who comes, and I find that I have a portion with him. And I have a portion, a right, and yes, even a memorial. Because he says, "Come and eat and drink and remember." Remember the one who died in your place and who gives you a continuing memorial.